Hello and welcome to the channel, or welcome back if you are returning. What can be learned from the case of Christine Paolilla of Clear Lake City, Texas? What happened to Miss Irresistible 2003 for her to end up as a convicted mass murderer? These are just a couple of questions that I would love to have you discuss with me in the comments below. Christine's crime became known as the Clear Lake Murders, which made national headlines on the 18th of July, 2003. Clear Lake City, Texas has been in the news before. Andrea Yates on June 20th, 2001 drowned her 5 babies in the bathtub. Lisa Nowak on February 4th, 2007 drove all the way from her home in Clear Lake City to Orlando, Florida, where she attacked the girlfriend of the guy she was having an affair with. And that made news because she was an astronaut, and people were conjecturing that she must have used those astronaut diapers for the drive. It is also the home of Clara Harris, who murdered her husband by running him over with her luxury automobile. So, don't know if I really want to visit Clear Lake City, but I'm sure it's a nice place. It's in the suburbs of Houston. Let's take a closer look into the life of Christine Paolilla. Christine Marie Paolilla was born March 31st, 1986 in Long Island, New York. She was born to Lori and Charles Paolilla, and the birth of Christine completed their family and made it a family of 4. Christine has an older brother. For a couple of years, life was bliss. Lori was a homemaker, staying home and doting on her children, while Charles brought home the bucks. He was a construction worker and was a well-paid one at that. But a tragedy struck when Christine was just a couple of years old. Her father was killed in a construction accident, and this sent her mother into a tailspin. Lori started misusing substances and eventually became an addict and was unable to care for her 2 children. Eventually, her parents had to step in and take custody of the kids. And while she was able to visit the kids from time to time, this couldn't have been easy on any of them and might have confused young Christine quite a bit. Christine then started kindergarten, and she had to wear really thick glasses, and some of the kids teased her, and things only got worse for her because then her hair started falling out in clumps, and she lost her hair, she lost her eyebrows, she lost her eyelashes. She was diagnosed with alopecia, which is an autoimmune disease which is not uncommon, and it affects millions of Americans. Christine wore wigs, and sometimes they weren't very high quality wigs. It's kind of hard to get wigs for a 5-year-old. So some of her wigs actually came from the Halloween store, and kids were mean. She was picked on, she was bullied. She ended up having extremely low self-esteem. She didn't trust people. She didn't have very many friends. And it was just really rough for her. And then things began to get better for Christine. Her mom got clean, got remarried, and eventually the family unit moved to Clear Lake City, Texas for a fresh start, and Christine enrolled in high school there. And at first, as Christine was in school, she was withdrawn, she was kind of weird, but a couple of girls noticed her and befriended her. They were Rachael, Koloroutis, and Tiffany and Rachel. This was wonderful for Christine. These were 2 popular girls, and this was no fake friendship. They took her under their wings, taught her about makeup and how to improve her makeup skills. They advised her on wigs. They pulled her out of her shell. Christine thrived in this new relationship, this new friendship, and she was so happy when she went home and told her mom about her new friends when she first made friends with them, and then her mom was really happy to see the girls all hanging out at the house. Christine was so close to Tiffany and Rachel that she would even hang out with her wigs off, which, was a big step for her because she had never felt comfortable just being herself around anybody until she made friends with these girls. And, it was a meteoric rise. She became popular herself and even was voted Miss Irresistible by the student body in 2003. That same year, Tiffany and Rachel graduated. They worked to try to keep the relationship close even after they were done with high school and she was still going to high school. And around that same time, Christine met a guy and she was super drawn to him. He was a bad boy. He was a couple of years older. He was 21 and blonde. His name was Christopher Lee Snider, and he was a party animal with a criminal record. Christine knew that people didn't like him, but she thought that he was a diamond in the rough. She thought that all it took was her love to change him. So many young women make this mistake. They think that they can change someone, and it's not happening. Anyway, he started bossing her around. He started criticizing her. He even went to school one time and pulled her wig off in front of people because he had wanted her to hang out with him instead of going to school. And of course, her friends and her parents didn't want her going out with him. They tried their hardest to get her to see reason, but it wasn't happening. He kept telling Christine that Tiffany and Rachel weren't really her friends and he was the only one that was there for her. She was beginning to listen to him more and more, and this was worrying her parents because Christopher obviously had a hold over Christine and he seemed to be isolating her from her friends and family. They could see it happening, but there was no way they could stop her from seeing this boy. She was pretty much addicted to him, and perhaps to other things as well, since he encouraged her to use substances with him, and they started using substances more and more often. And it seemed like the more abusive he was, the more obsessed Christine was, and she became incredibly jealous. And they would have arguments, and Christine would go over to his house and camp out on his lawn, waiting to have words with him again. And she got so crazed over this guy that his family members even took to calling her the psycho. On the afternoon of July 18th, 2003, Rachel and Tiffany were getting ready for a get-together at their house. They were planning on people coming over around 6 p.m., just a few friends. Tiffany's boyfriend, Marcus Priscilla, was there, as was his cousin, Adalbert Sanchez, who had just moved to town like 2 weeks prior from Houston. He felt that the neighborhood he was living in was rough, and he just wanted someplace safer to live and to go to college. So he was there. They had arrived the night before at the girl's house. Marcus was Tiffany's boyfriend. He was a nice guy with a ready smile, and he was a college student, but he was also doing a little bit of dealing substances on the side, not anything big or gang related or anything like that. And Adalbert also was rumored to have had some ties, but he didn't really. He was just planning to attend college in the fall as well. So these were a bunch of just fairly ordinary young adults. Anyway, around 3 p.m., Brittany, a friend of the girls that was expected to come over around 6 p.m., called Tiffany's cell phone. And at that time, Marcus answered the phone, and he said that Tiffany was in the restroom. So Brittany decided to call back later. She did call back about a half an hour later, and there was no answer. She called back a couple other times, and then decided that she was just going to go show up at the house around 6, a little after 6. She was invited. She was one of the guests that was expected to be there, so no biggie. Anyway, she had her boyfriend, his cousin, and her nephew in the car with her. And that was one of the things that she was wanting to say when she was trying to call ahead. So she pulled up to the house and she saw Marcus's car in the driveway and Tiffany's truck was parked out front. So she knew they were home because their cars were there. She was a little puzzled about why they didn't answer the phone, but then she thought, maybe they were sleeping or, whatever. So she went to the front door and she rang the bell and there was no answer. And she rang the bell a couple more times and then she tried to look inside and she couldn't see anything. And so then she started pounding on the door and there was still no response and she couldn't really hear anything coming from inside either. So she rattled the doorknob and the door was unlocked. So she pushed the door open and it was so quiet in the house that all she could hear was the creaking of the door. And she went in and she was looking around and she noticed a weird metallic scent in the air. And you could probably guess what that was. She walked into the living room, and to her horror, there was blood spatter everywhere. All four were splayed about the living room. There was shell casings and stuff. She freaked out, and she ran out of the house. And when she got to the front lawn, she just kind of collapsed on the lawn. And she was hysterically pounding the grass and stuff. She was freaking out. And her boyfriend saw this and he really wanted to know what had caused this reaction. So then he went into the house and when he saw all that, he ran out of the house as well and he spotted one of the girl's neighbors out in their lawn, so he told them to call the police, and they did. When the police arrived and they were assessing the scene, what they saw was that the four young people had all been taken out. Tiffany and Albert were on the couch. Marcus had some blunt trauma to his head, but also had been shot, as had all the others. The two girls had been shot in the crotch, which is a very personal thing and led the police to believe that obviously whoever did this must have known them, that and the overkill, the spatter everywhere, that also indicated that it was probably somebody with a lot of rage, somebody that knew these kids. There were two different types of shell casings, so that kind of indicated two different shooters. But other than that, they couldn't really figure anything out from the scene. There was not really any evidence left behind. Christine had been at her job at the Walgreens cosmetic counter when her friends' bodies were discovered, and she took the news very badly. Her parents reported that she spent every night sleeping in their bed for weeks after this crime, and she was crying all the time, and she seemed to be very scared. Police explored the possibility that it could have been involved with Marcus's dealing or Albert's history, and they were coming up with nothing. In 2004, when they realized that all those leads had fizzled out, they eventually got back to square one and did the canvass of the neighborhood again and compiled the information from all the neighbors who had seen that there were a couple people on the street walking to and from Tiffany and Rachel's house the day of the murders, and they were able to get a composite sketch of these two suspects. Meanwhile, Christine and Christopher had broken up. He had been caught stealing cars in Kentucky, and he was doing time. And when that happened, Christine decided to put herself into rehab. And while she was in rehab, she met a guy named Stanley Justin Rott, who she got together with, and she married him in 2005. Anyway, the police got those sketches together. Those sketches were of a male who was blonde and a female who was wearing a bandana on her head, and she had very distinctive eyes. As the years passed, without any progress being made on the case, Rachel's dad got super frustrated and decided to take matters into his own hands. He started his own investigation, and he got a bunch of billboards that he put the sketches on. The sketches got released to news stations, and a guy who had been in rehab at the same time as Christine thought that that looked a lot like Christine. So he called Crime Stoppers and told them about his time in rehab and about this gal, Christine Paolilla, who had been in there with him, and about how she had told him that she had been involved in a big crime in the same time frame that this murders took place. So the police now knew who they were looking for, and they eventually tracked her down to a decrepit hotel room in San Antonio, where she and her husband had been holed up for about 8 months or so. And there were a lot of substances in the room and, dirty needles, and it was bad. Anyway, the police took them both in, and so the police started questioning Christine, who was saying that she had nothing to do with what happened to her friends and that she didn't know anything about it. She had been at work. But at the same time, they were questioning her husband, who immediately turned on Christine, ratted her out 100%, and said that they had been on the run ever since Christine had seen the sketches on a news report, that she had gotten hysterical, and they abandoned their house. She had inherited $366,000. It was a trust fund from when her father had died. And with that, she had bought an apartment with her husband. And they just left that behind and took off on the run because she told him that she had taken part in those murders, and she thought that that sketch looked an awful lot like her, and he had to agree. So he told the police everything that had happened that day that he said Christine had told him. He said she said that she and her boyfriend, Chris, had been hanging out, and then Chris decided that he wanted to get some substances. He wanted to steal some from Marcus. They both knew that Marcus had it over there at Tiffany and Rachel's house. And so they went there with the guns, and things got out of hand. He got into an argument with Marcus, and he hit Marcus, and they ended up using their weapons on everybody. And he said that Christine told him that after that had been done, she and Chris had left the house, but then she turned around and went back in, and that she had seen Rachel crawling across the living room floor with her cell phone trying to call for help, and that she then took her weapon and used the butt end of her weapon to hit Rachel over the head. Well, that was what we call guilty information. This was something that had not been released by law enforcement about the crime. This is something that only someone who had been involved in the crime or had spoken to someone who was involved in the crime would know. So the police knew they had Christine at that point. And they went and were questioning her more, and her story changed a couple of times. Meanwhile, Chris had gotten out of lockup and had gotten a girlfriend out of state, and he had been living with her. And some of his family called him from Texas, let him know that psycho girlfriend had been picked up for murder and was being questioned, and that police were going to be looking for him next. And he took the coward's way out. He OD'd, and so we'll never know his story, his version of what happened. And in court, and to this day, Christine still tries to blame him 100%. First, she said her weapon went off accidentally, but then experts showed that there was no way that it could fire on its own. And then she said that Chris had grabbed her hands and put his hands over hers in order to make the weapon fire. And she kept saying that it was due to the abuse that she had endured was why she was afraid of him, or why he can control her. Her mom testified that she had confided that Chris had forced himself on her, and it sounds like there was a very messed up, dysfunctional relationship there, but that does not excuse anything that occurred at that house and does not excuse the taking of any lives. And she was very much an active participant in this. So I don't really have any sympathy for the young woman. I think that there were several points before it reached that point where something could have been done that maybe would have been some sort of intervention that would have made her not become the person that she became. But she did become this person, and she callously took the lives, or participated in the taking of the lives, of her two very best friends, and then she just went to work within a half an hour of committing the crime. It's pretty horrendous. Anyway, it was no surprise that Christine was found guilty of all 4 counts, and because she was only 17 when the crimes occurred, she did not face capital punishment, if you know what I mean, and she was just sentenced to life. Christine is doing her time there in Texas. She will be eligible for parole when she is 60. So, let me know in the comments what you think of the case, whether it was due to substance use, whether there's a screw loose in her that she was just destined to do something bad someday, or just what you think of this, and we'll have a discussion in the comments. Thank you for watching. Please like this video and consider subscribing to me. Thank you again.